Major Reed was 34 years old, and he believed, the way a man believes in the ground beneath his boots, that his life was solid. He had 62 acres of delta soil outside Greenwood, Mississippi, the same land his grandfather had broken his back over for 40 years. The same flat, dark earth that flooded in spring and baked in August, and somehow, season after season, gave back more than it took. He had a farmhouse with a porch that needed painting. He had a wife named Zola who still turned heads when she walked into a room. He had rough hands and a quiet belief that if a man worked hard enough and built something real enough, the people he loved would understand why. They had talked about children, had wanted them even, but the farm kept pulling the timing wrong, and somehow 6 years had passed, with that conversation postponed, along with everything else. He had never touched the trust fund his grandfather had left behind. Not once in 12 years. A private decision, a point of pride he had never found the right words to explain, not even to Zola. He told himself he would get there eventually. There was always more time. He had been wrong about more things than he knew. The Delta air had cooled early that week. Clouds rolling in from the west, the kind that smell like rain 2 hours before it arrives. Major had been out since 6 that morning, walking the east field rows, checking the last of the soybean harvest. Good crop, probably the best in 3 years. He was tired in the honest way a man gets when the work has been real, and he was looking forward to a hot plate and a quiet evening. He stepped into the machinery shed to hang up the tractor key. Concrete floor, corrugated metal walls, the sharp smell of diesel and motor oil. One bare bulb overhead. Outside, a mockingbird was running through his whole catalog. Loud and relentless, the way they get in October when summer is gone and they have nothing left to do but perform. His phone buzzed on the workbench. Zola. He pressed the green button without thinking, still reaching for the key hook, still half looking at a cracked hose fitting he'd been meaning to replace since July. "Hey," he started, but Zola didn't hear him. The line was already alive with her voice, and underneath it, a man's low chuckle and the rush of a car on an open highway. Major went still. 8 months now, Zola was saying. 8 months, and I still feel like I can breathe around you. That's not nothing, Darius. Darius said something low that Major couldn't catch. Zola laughed. Not the laugh Major knew. This one was loose and unguarded. The laugh of a woman who had stopped performing entirely. The laugh she used to give him a long time ago. "I am so tired," she said. "Tired of that farm. Tired of the sameness. Major is kind, I'll give him that. He works like a mule. But a mule doesn't make you feel alive. All he knows is land. I could disappear into one of those fields and he wouldn't notice until harvest." A pause, then quieter. "I keep telling myself there was a point when I tried to reach him. Maybe 3 years ago. I laid it all out. I said I was drowning." He nodded and went back to the seed catalog. "After that, I just stopped trying." Major did not move. He was standing in the center of the shed, one hand still half extended toward the pegboard. The cold that moved through him was not anger, it was recognition. The slow, terrible recognition of a man hearing someone describe a conversation he has no memory of, because he hadn't been present enough to remember it. He set the tractor key on the workbench, gently. He pressed the record button on his phone. He listened for 11 more minutes. She talked about Greenwood like a sentence she was serving. She talked about the farm like something she had survived. And once, only once, but clearly, she said, "I know I went about this the wrong way, but I didn't have any other way left." When the call ended, she hung up mid-laugh, the line going dead without ceremony. Major stood in the silence. The Mockingbird had stopped. Out on the county road, a truck swept its headlights once across the shed window and disappeared. He sent a text to his brother Jamal. 3 words, "Call me tonight." Then he washed his hands at the utility sink, the dirt going gray into the drain, and walked back to the farmhouse. He sat at the kitchen table. Zola set a plate in front of him. She asked about the harvest yield. He answered. She talked about the church potluck. He nodded. She looked pretty and tired and completely at ease. He did not tell her what he'd heard. Not yet. Because Major Reed was not a man who acted while he was still bleeding. He needed to be certain before he moved. So he waited until Zola went down the hall, then picked up the tablet they shared for farm records and opened the browser. Something cold and practical moved through him. The same instinct that tells a farmer to check the radar before trusting a clear sky. He scrolled. What he found would not just break his heart a second time. It would tell him exactly how long his marriage had already been over. The first browser search was dated 10 months ago, 2 full months before Zola said Darius had entered the picture. Understanding why she searched before she found him is the key to everything that followed. The search history went back 10 months. Divorce lawyers, Mississippi Delta, 10 months ago. How to protect assets before divorce, 9.5 months ago. Separate property, Mississippi law, 9 months ago. How long does divorce take in Mississippi? 8 months ago. Major sat down at the kitchen table. Outside, the rain arrived at last, soft and steady against the tin roof. He did the math, slowly, the way he did most things. The earliest search predated Darius by 2 months. She hadn't found someone new and gone looking for a way out. She had already been looking, and then found someone willing to walk into it with her. He sat with that, not with anger, with the effort of trying to understand it honestly. Because what he eventually recognized was this. The browser history was not the plan of a woman plotting against her husband. It was the act of a woman who had already quietly given up. She had said it herself on that call. I tried to reach him once. He went back to the seed catalog. After that, I stopped trying. The planning hadn't caused the breakdown. The giving up had. And the giving up had happened long before any browser search. In the space of all the evenings Major came home and talked about the crop instead of asking how she was. That did not make what she did acceptable, but it made it, finally, comprehensible. He closed the tablet, set it back between the fruit bowl and the radio, went to bed, did not sleep. He lay in the dark, running through what he knew, what he could prove, and what he needed next. Confronting Zola tonight would produce tears and denials, and a warning that gave her time to move more money. Waiting would produce evidence, a real case, his farm protected. He chose to wait, not because he was cold, because he was careful. The next morning, while Zola drove into Greenwood, Major made 2 calls. First, Simone Ellis, an attorney out of Jackson, sharp, composed, the kind of woman who listens without interrupting and has already formed 3 conclusions before you finish your first sentence. He'd met her at a farm credit seminar in Ridgeland 2 years back. He played her the recording over the phone. She was quiet through all 11 minutes. Come to Jackson this week, she said. Bring the tablet. A pause. The recording is legally complicated, Major. You weren't a party to that call, which matters in court. But it tells me exactly where to look. What I find when I look, that becomes the case. Second call, Jamal, up in Clarksdale. I need you to know what's happening, and I need you to not tell Mama yet. How long you been carrying this? Since last night. I'll come down Saturday, Jamal said. And he did. Drove down without being asked, stayed through the following week. Got up at 5 and worked the Northfield alongside Major without needing an explanation. Sometimes the best thing a brother can do is just show up in the same field. 3 days later, in Simone's office on Rowan Street in Jackson, glass desk, floor-to-ceiling law books, a small silver clock ticking on the shelf behind her, she laid out what she'd found. Someone has been moving money from your joint checking account for 9 months. Small amounts, structured to look like household expenses. She turned the laptop to face him. Added together, $38,400. I didn't see it, Major said. You wouldn't have. You hired a part-time bookkeeper in January to manage the operational account during harvest season. You stopped reviewing the household account daily. The transfers were routed specifically through that account, I think because she knew your attention was elsewhere. He stared at the screen. His grandfather's money had seeded that account. 6 years of harvests had kept it healthy. One transfer is a deposit on a furnished apartment in Jackson, Simone said. Another went directly to a personal account registered to Darius Crawford. She wasn't just planning to leave you. She was paying someone to build her the next life. What do? We document everything, and we don't move until the right moment. She looked at him steadily. Can you go home tonight and act completely normal? He thought about the kitchen table, the harvest yield question, the church potluck, passing the salt. Yes, he said, I can do that. It was Gloria who complicated everything and clarified it at the same time. She called on a Thursday evening. Something in her voice made Major pull over on the county road and sit with the engine idling. Your lights have been off before 8 every night this week, Gloria said, and Zola's car wasn't in that driveway Thursday morning when I drove past. A pause. I'm not asking you to explain, but I have something I should have told you a long time ago. She told him that Zola had come to her more than once over the past 2 years. Not to complain, to confide. She told me, Major doesn't look at me anymore. He only looks at the fields. I told her marriage has seasons. I told her to be patient. A breath. I've been wondering since whether I gave her the right answer. After they hung up, Major sat in the truck for a long time. He thought about all the evenings he'd come home and talked about soil moisture, and not once asked Zola how she was. The kind of asking that waits for a real answer. The Saturday mornings, she'd suggested driving to Natchez just to see something different, and he'd said maybe next weekend. The anniversary dinner, the yellow dress, the equipment supplier's call that ate up most of the evening, while she sat across from him with an expression he now understood had not been contentment. It had been resignation. He was not excusing her. What she had done was a betrayal, and it carried real consequences. But for the first time, he was asking a different question. Not what did Zola do to me, but when did she stop believing I was still there? He didn't have the answer, and he wasn't sure he deserved one. The following evening, Zola came home and set her keys on the counter. She smiled at him, warm, careful, practiced. Major looked at her and saw clearly what lived underneath. A woman maintaining a performance she no longer had the energy for. He said quietly, Pack your things, Zola. Get off this farm. She stared at him. Then she cried, and this time her tears did not look entirely like strategy. Something real was underneath them, something she had not given herself permission to feel until this moment. He let her cry. He did not reach for her. When she was done, she left. Major stepped out onto the porch and stood in the dark, listening to the delta settle into night. Before we go further, I want to ask you something real. Major was emotionally checked out for years. Zola felt invisible, reached out once, and was met with a seed catalog. And yet she responded by draining $38,000 from their account while still sleeping under his roof. If the person you love slowly stops seeing you, does that ever justify what Zola chose to do? Type 1 if you believe Major's emotional absence shares some of the blame. Type 2 if you believe nothing, not loneliness, not years of being overlooked, can ever justify what Zola did. Or drop your own story in the comments. You might be surprised how many people here understand exactly what you mean. Stay with us, because the woman who laughed about her husband working like a mule is about to find out what a quiet man looks like when he finally decides to move. Zola did not go quietly. Major had expected that. She had always been a woman who moved through the world with force, not cruelty, but the driven certainty of someone who had learned early that persistence gets results. She had organized the biggest fundraiser First Baptist had seen in a decade. She had charmed suppliers at the farm co-op. She had once simply decided she wanted Major Reed and gotten him. Now she turned that same force against him. Within a week of leaving the house, her version of events had traveled across half of Lafleur County. Major heard it from 3 different directions in 4 days. The woman at the farm supply store on Howard Street, his cousin from church on Fulton, and Earl next door, who delivered the news with the discomfort of a man who does not want to be inside anyone's marriage. The story was simple. Major Reed was a cold man, married to his land. A man who had left his wife to disappear inside a farmhouse while he looked at nothing but fields. There was enough truth in it to sting. That was the part Major had to sit with, not the lie of it, but the fragment of truth she had sharpened into a weapon. Here is what Zola was doing, and it is worth understanding clearly. When a person's private plan begins to unravel, they rarely retreat. They escalate. Because retreat means facing the full weight of what they've done, and that is too much to carry alone. So the stage moves outward, into the neighborhood, the church, anywhere an audience can substitute for the one person who is no longer listening. Zola went public not because she was calculating coldly. She went public because she was frightened. An audience demands a story, and once you give them one, you have to keep living inside it. 2 weeks after he'd told her to leave, she showed up at the farm office on the eastern edge of the property on a Wednesday morning when she knew employees would be present. She came in crying, loudly. "I just want to talk to him," she told Ronnie, who immediately looked like he wished he'd called in sick. "I just want to understand what happened to my marriage." Ronnie called Major from the back room. Major came out and stood in the doorway, pressed blouse, careful hair, tears already drawing the attention of 2 people in the parking lot. "Zola, I just want to talk." Everything goes through Simone Ellis's office now. Even. Final. That's how this works. She held his gaze a moment, the calculation shifting behind her eyes, then walked to her car, slowly enough that the people in the parking lot saw every step. It was Earl who delivered the next piece, leaning on his truck at the property line a few days later, with the tone of a man who has decided, after considerable internal debate, that he must say something. "Down off Highway 49. That diner outside Indianola, the one with the blue awning. Saw Zola's car in the lot. She was in a back booth with some fellow. Well-dressed, nice truck." She handed him an envelope. "What did he say?" Major asked. "Said, 'Gimme a little more, and I can get things set up for you in Jackson.'" "I appreciate you, Earl." "Didn't feel right not to," Earl said, and went home. Major called Simone that evening. "That lines up with what I've already traced," she said. "Last 2 transfers. One is a deposit on an apartment in Jackson. One went directly into Darius Crawford's personal account." A pause. "I've also filed a motion to freeze the joint account pending proceedings. No more transfers are possible." She let that land for a moment. Within 48 hours of the freeze, the transfers stopped. Within a week of the transfers stopping, Darius stopped returning her calls. Major looked at the October sky through the window, pink and orange above the flat delta horizon. "He wasn't with her because he loved her," Major said. "He was with her because she had access to your money," Simone said. "Once that ended, so did he." This is worth naming plainly. Darius had identified a woman in real pain with real access to money, and he gave her his complete attention. Not because he meant it, but because attention was the cheapest and most effective currency available. She had mistaken a transaction for a relationship. The envelope crossing the table in that diner was proof of exactly that. Zola had risked everything for a man who was running his own exit plan. She just hadn't known it until the money was gone. She filed for emergency spousal support, Simone added. Claims abandonment and financial hardship. Claims abandonment, Major said. Hearing is Thursday morning. On Thursday, Simone presented 9 months of documented transfers, traced account destinations, and the browser search history to the court. The financial picture was unambiguous. A spouse who had been systematically moving marital assets to a third party while claiming hardship. The judge reviewed the filings, asked Zola's attorney 2 questions, denied the request. Zola sat at the plaintiff's table very still. Major did not look at her. That evening, his phone buzzed. Darius is leaving me. I don't have anyone anymore. I'm sorry. I want to come home. Major read it, set the phone face down on the workbench, sat in the machinery shed for a while. Same bare bulb, same diesel smell. He thought about the word home. He thought about what it had meant to each of them and whether it had ever, at the same time, meant the same thing. He didn't text back, but he didn't delete it either. What he felt was not triumph. It was closer to grief. The grief of watching something that might once have gone differently go the only way it was ever going to go, given the choices both of them had made. He turned off the light and went inside. Zola had lost the hearing, lost Darius, and lost the public sympathy she had worked so hard to build. She thought the worst was over. She had no idea the person who had truly ended her plan was someone she trusted with everything, and that she was about to come tell him herself. She came on a Thursday afternoon in November, the sky low and gray the way Delta skies get when winter is finally making up its mind about arriving. No text ahead of time, no call, just her silver sedan in the driveway when Major came in from the north field. The same car she'd driven since the year they married, with the dent in the rear bumper from a Vicksburg parking lot she'd always meant to deal with and never did. He stood beside his truck for a moment, dust from the field road settling around his boots. Then he went inside. Zola was at the kitchen table, not crying, sitting with both hands wrapped around a mug she must have made herself because the coffee was fresh. She had worn a soft gray blouse, hair pulled back simply, no staging in it, and that absence was the first thing he noticed. The performance was gone. What was left in its place was a woman who looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the case, or the court hearing, or Darius. She looked tired the way a person does when they have finally stopped running from something and turned to face it. I'm not here to fight you, she said. He sat across from her. All right. I know what Simone has. The case is done. A pause. I know that. Then what are you here for? She looked at the mug for a moment. Then she looked up. I needed you to hear me say it, not through lawyers, not in a courtroom. That I was wrong. She held his gaze. Not wrong because I got caught. Wrong. I sat in that courtroom and listened to my own voice, my own laugh, talking about you like you were something to complain about, like you were scenery. And I need you to know that I heard it the same way you must have heard it, standing in that shed. Major said nothing. I got lost, she said. I had been so lonely for so long, and Darius told me things I needed to hear, and I knew what I was doing wasn't right. Some part of me always knew, but stopping felt like admitting I had wasted years of my life. So I kept going. She looked at her hands. I didn't know how to stop. You emptied our account, Zola, Major said. His voice was level, not cold, just accurate. The way a man speaks when he has decided that honesty is more useful than anger. Being lonely and moving $38,000 are two different things. I know, she said, and she did not argue. Then, after a moment, did Simone tell you how she got the recording of me and Darius? She told me someone sent it to her, Major said. Zola nodded slowly. I was at my apartment. Darius was there. We were going over the plan, the timeline, the move to Jackson, what came next. I had him on speaker. She stopped, drew a breath. Naya had come by to drop something off. I let her in and then forgot she was still in the next room. A long pause. She heard everything. She recorded it on her own phone. She was there. She was a witness to all of it. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, one of the farm dogs barked once at something in the soybean rows, then went quiet. She told me afterward, Zola said. After the hearing. Said she'd sent it to Simone weeks before it went to court, and she needed me to know it was her. She said she was sorry. Zola's voice dropped. But she wasn't sorry enough to take it back. Major looked at her. Simone already told me, he said quietly. About Nia. About the recording. Something shifted in Zola's face. He watched it move through her. The slow, arriving realization that he had known for weeks. That he had sat across this kitchen table, had listened to her without interrupting, without letting her see a single thing, and had not once reached for that particular knife. You knew, she said. I did. She looked at him. And you didn't use it. It wasn't the point, he said. Let us stop here for a moment and look at what Major just did, because it says more about him than anything that came before it. He had the full story. He had documentation, financial records, the testimony of her own sister. He had every justification to lead with Nia's name. To watch Zola's face collapse the moment she realized the instrument of her exposure had been the person she trusted most. He could have done that. In this room, at this table, no one would have blamed him. He didn't. Not because he had forgiven her, he hadn't, but because Major understood, at a level that doesn't require articulation, that a person's lowest moment is not the right moment to reach for the most painful weapon available. He had what he needed. The case was done, and using Nia against Zola in this room would not have served justice. It would have served cruelty. Justice and cruelty are not the same thing. Even when the target has earned the pain, that distinction, knowing the difference and holding to it even when no one is watching, is what separates a man of genuine character from a man of performance. My own sister, Zola said, and her voice had gone very quiet. She told me she did it because she was trying to protect me from myself. That she'd rather I hate her than watch me destroy my life. She shook her head slowly. She's always loved you, you know. Not like, just, as a brother. She said you were the right kind of man. Even when I was telling her you weren't enough. Her voice dropped further. Even then. Major looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, and there was no anger in it, no performance, just the plain truth of a man who has finally stopped needing a shield between himself and what is real. You don't have to pretend anymore, Zola. You're really tired, aren't you? It wasn't a question. Something in her gave way. Not loudly, the way a structure gives way when the last beam finally shifts. A slow interior collapse that only becomes visible once it is already done. She bent forward over the table, and cried. And it was nothing like the farm office, or the church parking lot, or the plaintiff's table. This was the grief that had been waiting behind all of those performances. The grief of a woman who had been outrunning herself for a year and had finally, simply, run out of road. She cried for a long time. Major sat across from her and let her. He did not reach for her hand. He did not tell her it was going to be all right, because he didn't know if it was, and he had never been a man who would say something he couldn't stand behind. But he stayed. He stayed and bore witness, not to forgive, not to condemn, but because she was a human being in genuine pain, and he was still capable of recognizing that. Even now. Even after all of it. That is not weakness. That is not love either. Not anymore. It is something quieter and more durable than either. The decency of a man who does not need to watch someone suffer in order to feel that things have been made right. When the crying slowed, she straightened and pressed the back of her hand against her eyes. She looked across the table at him, at the man she had called a mule, had underestimated, had tried to leave, and found that he was still there. Not reaching toward her, not turning away, just present, quiet, real. He walked her to the door. She stood by the sedan in the gray November light, and in that moment she looked, somehow, like the young woman he had married, before the years had quietly rearranged everything between them. "I'm sorry, Major," she said, "for all of it." He nodded once. "I know you are." She got in the car. The taillights disappeared down the county road. The dust settled. Major went back inside, sat at the table, and wrapped his hands around her coffee mug, still warm. He sat in the quiet kitchen and held, at the same time, two things that were both entirely true and did not cancel each other out. She had betrayed him deliberately, over months, with planning and deception. And she had been genuinely lonely, in a genuinely empty way, for longer than either of them had ever said out loud. He was not going to use the second to excuse the first. But he was no longer willing to pretend the second didn't exist. That was new. It cost him something to hold it. He held it anyway. The divorce papers were already being drawn up, but Simone Ellis had one more thing to show him. And it was going to be the hardest thing he had read since the night he first opened that browser history. Because this time, what it revealed was not about Zola. It was about him. The divorce was finalized on a gray Wednesday in December. Same LaFleur County Courthouse where Major had applied for his first farm operating loan 11 years ago, back when he was 23, and trying not to let the loan officers see how nervous he was. The building smelled the same. Old wood, radiator heat, and something faintly institutional that courthouses and schools share. The smell of decisions being made in rooms that were built to outlast the people making them. Major sat at one table with Simone beside him. Zola sat across the room with her attorney, a measured man from Greenwood, who carried the professional composure of someone seeing a case through to its end, regardless of what he privately thought of its merits. The judge reviewed the terms. Given the documented financial transfers and the established pattern of asset concealment over 9 months, Zola received a modest share of the marital assets. The farm stayed with Major. The equipment, the contracts, all 62 acres of Delta bottomland, his. Zola signed without speaking. Major signed without speaking. They did not look at each other when it was done. In the hallway, Simone shook his hand. "It's over." He nodded, thanked her, walked out into the cold December air and stood for a moment on the courthouse steps, looking at Howard Street. A woman was walking a small dog on the sidewalk below, the dog investigating every crack in the concrete with the total, focused devotion of a creature for whom the present moment is the only moment that exists. Major breathed in. The air smelled like winter, Delta mud, and someone's wood stove burning a few blocks over. He got in his truck and drove home. January became February. February became March. He still woke at 5, still worked the fields, still came home with dirty hands and a quiet mind. But the grinding, obsessive quality was gone. That particular pressure he had been living under for so long, he had stopped knowing it was there. The feeling that if he slowed down for even an hour, something essential would fall apart. It had lifted somewhere between December and February, so gradually he couldn't name the day it happened. He started calling his mother on Sunday evenings without needing a reason. One Saturday in February, he drove to Natchez, 4 hours round trip, no agenda, just to sit on the bluff above the Mississippi and eat a plate of catfish and let his eyes rest on something that was not a field he was responsible for. He texted Jamal a photo of the river in the last of the afternoon light. Jamal called 10 minutes later, and they talked for an hour, the easy way brothers do when they've stopped needing a crisis to justify reaching out. One evening in late February, Major came in from the fields, washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and stood for a moment, looking out the window at the last light on the north field. He thought, "I used to eat standing over this sink." He couldn't remember when that habit had started. He couldn't remember the last time he had simply sat at his own table and had a quiet meal without his mind already in tomorrow's work. He sat down. He ate his supper. It was a small thing, but it was also, in its own way, not small at all. It was Simone who called in March, not about the case was done, about something Nia had sent her. She found it while she was going through her old messages, Simone said. After the divorce was final, she was deleting things from the past year, trying to clear some of it out. She found a text Zola had sent her 4 months before the hearing, and had saved without really meaning to. A pause. "She forwarded it to me because she felt you deserved to see the full picture. She said it wasn't a legal matter anymore. It was just a human one." He drove to Jackson the following Tuesday. Simone's office, the same glass desk, the same law books, the same small silver clock. She turned her phone to face him across the desk. He leaned forward and read, "I'm thinking about stopping the whole thing. The plan, Darius, all of it. I look at Major sometimes when he doesn't know I'm watching, and I think, that's still the man I married. He doesn't look at me anymore, but maybe I stopped showing him I was there too. I'm so tired. Tell me what to do." Major sat back. He read it a second time. "She was going to stop," he said. "She was seriously considering it," Simone said carefully. "Nia urged her to. Zola went quiet for a few days, and then she made another transfer to Darius's account." The clock ticked on the shelf behind Simone. Major tried to locate himself in that window of time, early October, the harvest at its most demanding. Rolling fork for a parts order, before sunrise, after dark, the days bleeding into each other. He could not recall a specific moment when Zola had moved toward him during those particular days. He could not say with certainty that she hadn't either, that she hadn't tried, in some quiet or indirect way, and found no one there to receive it. That uncertainty sat in his chest like a stone that would not shift. Here is what that text reveals, and it matters not as an excuse for Zola, but as the honest, complete picture of how a marriage can end without either person ever intending it. Zola had one real window of reconsideration. One moment when she was looking at her husband and remembering who he had been to her. In that window, two things would have needed to happen simultaneously. She would have needed to reach toward him, and he would have needed to be reachable. We cannot know with certainty whether she reached. We know with certainty that he was not present in those days in any way that would have made reaching feel possible. This is not the same as saying Major caused the betrayal. He did not. Zola made choices. Deliberate, sustained, expensive choices that were entirely her own. But there is a difference between being the cause of a crisis and being a contributing condition to one. Major had not been cruel. He had been absent. And absence, over enough years, creates the kind of silence that a person in despair can read as permission to stop trying. He had won the case. He had behaved with integrity throughout every step of it. He had not done a single legally or morally wrong thing. And he had also, slowly, without ever choosing to, made the woman he had married feel so unseen that she had gone looking for a door anywhere she could find one, and had walked through a very bad one. "I won the case," Major said quietly. "But not because I did everything right." Simone looked at him with the measured regard of a woman who does not offer comfort that has not been earned. "That's a very honest thing to say." "It's the true thing," he said. He thanked her. He drove back to Greenwood in the early afternoon, the farm lane familiar under his tires, the fields spreading out on either side in the pale March light, pale green and beginning again, the way Delta fields always did when the season turned. He parked. He sat in the truck for a while without getting out. He had kept the farm. He had kept his integrity. He had not compromised his conduct through any of it. He had also kept secrets that should have been shared. He had kept his attention fixed on proving himself when the person who most needed to know she mattered to him was standing 3 feet away in the same house. Two things, both true, neither canceling the other out. Real life, Major was learning, at considerable cost, rarely lets you choose only one. He thought the hardest part was behind him. But on his 35th birthday, 2 things arrived in the same morning. One he had been building toward his entire adult life, and one he never expected at all. And one of them was going to ask him a question he wasn't ready to answer. Major Reed turned 35 on a warm April Saturday. Light coming in gold and level across the soybean rows, the air holding the smell of damp earth and new growth. The porch swing gave its familiar creak in the breeze, the same creak it had made since his grandfather built the porch, through droughts and debt and one very long, very difficult year. Major found, somewhat to his own surprise, that this comforted him. He was at the kitchen counter with his coffee when his phone buzzed with a notification from the family trust attorney in Memphis. He read it, set the phone down, stood still. His grandfather's trust fund, the one he had known about since he was 22, the one he had never touched because he needed the farm to stand on what his own hands built, not on what he had been handed, had transferred to him in full that morning. Enough to retire every equipment mown, enough to expand the Northfield, enough to build the irrigation system he'd been designing in his mind for 4 years. He thought about the decision he had made 12 years ago to keep it private, a quiet point of pride. He had told himself he would explain it to Zola when the right moment came. There's always more time. He thought about what it might have meant to her, to know that the man she felt was suffocating on 62 Delta acres actually had options, that he had chosen to stay, that this life was not a trap, but something he was deliberately building, for both of them, even when it didn't feel that way from her side of the kitchen. She had never known that. He had never said it. He did not know if it would have changed anything. That door was closed now. He picked up his coffee, moved toward the porch. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "Do you still remember the poem you wrote for me?" He went still in the kitchen doorway. 7 words, no name, no context. He knew immediately who had sent it. There was only one person in the world who could have. He had written the poem 11 years ago, sitting on the tailgate of his first truck on a dirt road outside Greenwood, before he'd learned to be guarded about loving someone that openly. He had read it to Zola in the dark. She had cried, laughed at herself for crying, kept the paper in her wallet for 3 years until it went soft at the creases. He held the phone and stood in the morning light coming through the screen door. He thought about who she had been when he wrote it, young and lit up from the inside, certain the world was arranged in her favor. He thought about who she had become in the years of this marriage, the slow, invisible erosion of a woman losing herself in a life that had stopped feeling like hers. He thought about the text she had sent Nia. "That's still the man I married, but he doesn't look at me anymore." He thought about Nia, 28 years old, making the hardest call of her life because she believed the truth mattered more than the peace. He thought about standing in the machinery shed on a Tuesday night in October, pressing the record button on his phone. He thought about all the things he had come to understand too late. His thumb moved to the reply field. He typed, "Are you okay?" He looked at it. Then he deleted it, not with anger, not with coldness, with the deliberate calm of a man who has learned the difference between understanding something and needing to act on it. Some doors, once honestly closed, should stay closed, not because the feeling behind them is gone, but because reopening them would serve neither person. He set the phone face down on the counter. He stepped out onto the porch. The field spread out before him, green and even, rising in long, patient rows toward the tree line. 2 hawks were making slow circles above the east field, unhurried in the way of creatures who understand that waiting and losing are not the same thing. The porch swing moved in the breeze. The mockingbird, somewhere past the barn, was going through his whole catalog again, same as always. Everything around him was exactly what it had always been, and something inside him was quietly, permanently different. The way things become after you have looked at them honestly enough and long enough that you can finally set them down. Major Reed stood on his porch and breathed in the smell of his grandfather's soil and his own harvest coming in, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, exactly where he was. Not triumphant, not healed in the clean, finished way stories sometimes promise, but present, intact, clear-eyed about what had happened, what he had lost, what he had failed to protect, and what he had managed to keep. That was enough. In fact, it was quite a lot. This story teaches us that the deepest betrayals in a marriage are rarely born of cruelty alone. They begin in the silence between 2 people who have both, gradually, stopped knowing how to find each other, until the distance between them is navigable only by the wrong roads. Zola chose a wrong road. There is no softening that. What she did, the deception, the money, the year of quiet planning, was a genuine betrayal that carried genuine consequences. But Major's part in this story is not only where he was wronged. It is also the years when he was simply not present to the person he had promised to love. Not absent in a dramatic way, in the ordinary, good intentions way that is far more common in long marriages than any of us want to admit. Love is not something you finish building and step back from. It is something you tend, daily, imperfectly, with the same attention you give to the work that makes you feel worthy of your own life. The work is not enough on its own. The love is not enough on its own. It has to be both, at the same time, without one consuming the other. Major Reed learned that. Too late for his marriage, not too late for his life. And that, not the court victory, not the farm, not the trust fund, is the only kind of justice that actually heals anything. Thank you for being here today. If this story reached something you recognize, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Every line in these emotional stories comes from real human insight and lived experience. AI was used only to enhance clarity and pacing, allowing